to air the episode on our CandaceOwens.com website, we underwent extensive DDoS attacks all weekend. Essentially, our servers were being overwhelmed. Then yesterday evening, we received a second strongly worded letter from the Élysée Palace from Brigitte and Emmanuel Macron. This time it's a very brief letter, which we are going to show you in its entirety later on in the show. What can we say other than the Macrons sure are not behaving like a couple who have absolutely nothing to hide? So let's figure out why they are behaving the way that they are. Welcome back to our Becoming Brigitte series. So a lot of people were wondering with the first installment, the entry to this series, why are the French people allowing this to happen? How could they allow all of these things to happen? And you're probably wondering how on earth Brigitte and Emmanuel Macron have pulled this off, essentially this mass suppression of the press so that none of us were even aware of all of this weird stuff happening in their country. How is it that Emmanuel Macron, who was virtually unknown to the public a year before he came into power, managed to scuttle the campaign of François Fillon, the man who was a shoo-in essentially for the presidency? How did he do all of this? Well, for English speakers, it's a bit like the rise of Barack Obama. Sure, yes, Barack Obama was a senator and he therefore was involved in politics to some degree, but his ascension into the presidency did sort of in many ways come out of nowhere. Except Barack Obama was not married to someone who was more than 2 decades older than him. Emmanuel Macron, just to be very clear, and I will state this again and again, was just 14 years old when he appeared in a school play at his school called La Providence. Brigitte, at that time, was a teacher at the same school who ran a theater workshop, okay? She was, in fact, 39 years old at this time and allegedly married with 3 children. One of her children, Lawrence, was the same age and therefore in school with Emmanuel Macron, okay? So the story goes that she saw him perform in a play and she was just swept away, eventually unwilling to resist her feelings for the much younger prince. So much so that she eventually divorced her husband. She broke up her family because of this. Of course, this is objectively a very creepy story. So how on earth did they sell it to the French public? That's where we need to begin here. The answer, of course, as always, is through a very intense propaganda campaign that is filled with lies and severe intentional misrepresentations. As Xavier Poussard, that is the journalist that broke this incredible story, puts in his forthcoming book, he wrote this, quote, "To sell this improbable story, intense propaganda was deployed across all media, television, radio, and the internet. Books praising Brigitte and Emmanuel and glossy magazine covers saturated the public space. The aim was to subliminally instill in the minds a storytelling designed by the cream of the Parisian specialists of public image. This pulpy narrative told the story of Emmanuel Macron, a precocious and virtuoso student at Lycée La Providence in Amiens. The press compared him to Mozart, who won over his teacher Brigitte, a dynamic, beautiful, and charismatic woman," end quote. So yeah, they sold this as a story of triumph over conformity, right? This age-defying love, perhaps, as we now know, an early nod to the written works of Macron's favorite author, André Gide, who, as we mentioned in a previous episode, was a self-admitted pederast. He raped Muslim boys, and he wrote about this openly. And despite this, he would wind up, or at least his book would wind up, in Emmanuel Macron's first presidential portrait. Incredibly creepy. On the 14th of April, 2016, when Paris Match, the magazine, devoted its first cover to Brigitte, the readers were told that one day in her heart, everything secretly changes. She attends Milan Kundera's play entitled Jacques et son maître, in which one of the 9th graders, Emmanuel Macron, is the hero. He's already got his eagle eye. They write, oh yes, he's already got his eagle eye kind of honing in on Brigitte. That's what we're told. Here's, by the way, a little video of Emmanuel Macron performing when he was younger in a play. You can just take a look at this. We can let this run.
C'est bon de renaître. Elle m'entend. Ma sœur aveugle et muette. La nuit. Qu'est-ce qui fait le plus peur aux hommes? L'aboiement d'un chien,
l'ombre d'un homme.
Wonderful, wonderful, irresistible for an almost 40-year-old woman who then had him join her theater workshop in the next school year. Now, we should pause here to consider how terrifying it is that the media as an entity has this kind of power to romanticize acts of sheer evil and then to gaslight and bully those who recognize it to be so. Those of us who say, no, there's something very wrong with this picture. Anyways, no less than 60 newspaper covers were dedicated to Brigitte within a period of just 26 months. Paris Match alone thus far to date has dedicated 13 covers to Brigitte. Now, I would refer to that as sort of a psychological strategy of oversaturation, right? If you give the public so much information, whether it's true or false, it becomes immediately implausible to the average person that there might be something hidden, right? Because you're like, well, there's so much information. It becomes sort of the media bystander effect. If so many people are covering the story, then the story must be covered. It's already covered. There's nothing left for us to learn. So I'm going to now tell you the official legend that was established about Brigitte Macron in these early days by the media. It is as follows. First and foremost, they told the public that the age gap between them was that he was 17, an outright lie, and that Brigitte at the time was 36, also an outright lie. Now let's go through the timeline of Brigitte's prior life, which was asserted by this same media, okay? They tell us that in 1953, on April 13th, 1953, ironically, the same date that the MK Ultra program came into existence, Brigitte Trogneux, maiden name Trogneux, was born in Amiens. She was the youngest daughter of a family of confectioners who prospered in northern France. Then they tell us that after a strict Catholic education with the Sacred Heart Sisters in 1974, when she was 21 years old, she married a man named André Louis Ozier, becoming then Brigitte Ozier, married to a bank executive. Following in her husband's footsteps, Brigitte Ozier began a career as a press officer at the Chamber of Commerce in Lille. And then they went on to have 3 children. One, firstborn, Sebastian, in 1975, a son. Then they had Laurence, a daughter. That's the one that was the same age as Emmanuel Macron and attended school with him. They had her allegedly in 1977. And then came Tifon. Tifon, you will come to recognize, is really the only one of the children that speaks out and defends Brigitte Macron, which is quite interesting. They had her allegedly in 1984. And then the story goes that after becoming this press officer and working there at the Chamber of Commerce, she decided to switch to teaching at some point in the mid-1980s, first in Strasbourg as a literature teacher at the Lucie Berger Protestant College, then, of course, at La Providence, the Jesuit college back in her native Amiens, because her and Emmanuel Macron are from the same place. So in 1991, she went back there. And of course, while she was there, she fell head over heels in love with the brilliant student, Emmanuel Macron. Now, this entire story was being painted absent any pictures, right? And so as the press was selling this, they tried to get readers to imagine that Brigitte was just irresistibly sexy and hot, right? Like she was this sort of 1980s pinup doll. Just unbelievably like a Claudia Schiffer type. This was the image they were trying to paint in their head. Like she's older now, but ooh, if you had seen her when Emmanuel Macron saw her, she was like a pinup, and she was wearing short skirts. They talked about how she used to wear skirts and how all the boys were just drooling over her. All of these boys who happened to be going through puberty at the school, fantasizing about this hot Claudia Schiffer type teacher. And of course, the brilliant virtuoso Emmanuel Macron and her then began this sort of clandestine affair. Years later, in 2006, recognizing that she was hopelessly in love with Emmanuel Macron, she made a huge decision to break up her family by divorcing her husband, André Louis, the banker, and marrying her former student, Emmanuel Macron, just a year later in 2007. Okay. Again, that's the legend that was established by the media. Now, to control the public image of Brigitte, the couple brought in, well, a woman known as